I can't get to the.
You just use your clicker?
Yeah. Yeah, that I can, but I can't get to the start broadcast.
Oh, I can start it at that. No, maybe I can't. We have like 2 people here anyway, so.
Okay. So. Hi everyone, Lance Powers here, and thanks so much for coming. We're really excited to have you here. Just to make sure you're in the right place, this webinar will cover ways to harness a bipolar disorder to thrive in an ever-evolving workplace. If you were looking for how to spice up a boring life, you may be in the wrong spot. My co-founder Alexandra and I will be doing a Q&A after the webinar. You'll be muted during the presentation, but you should see an option to write in questions on your Zoom Meet control panel. Feel free to use the questions feature to write in throughout the presentation. Those questions will be anonymous. Now, it might seem counterintuitive to some that a disabling disorder can also be an unfair advantage at work, but bipolar has been correlated with increased creativity, increased intelligence, and an increased aptitude for leadership. Which brings me to who's here. We had all kinds of people register for this webinar, but I'm most excited about the number of you listening out there who are living successfully with a bipolar disorder. Respecting anonymity is really important to us, but man, I wish you could all see each other and the caliber of people that we have in attendance. And that goes to show that bipolar does not make us terrible people. It does not break us, and it does not disable us from doing and being whatever we want. Now, over the course of the webinar, you'll learn how to strengthen your foundation, how to open up to others, and how to harness your ups and downs. But why do we want to learn these things? To 10x your productivity, to level up your career? Like most webinars, yes, there's a good chance that you'll be able to learn some of that. But more importantly, you'll learn to explore the full extent of your abilities and to enjoy the journey while you do it. So who's this guy talking anyways? Well, I got my degree in finance from the University of Colorado. I was president of my fraternity and the business school, senator for the largest student government. I interned with Union Bank of Switzerland in New York and Deloitte back when it still had the touche. Other highlights included Lehman Brothers Investment Banking Seminar, Deloitte's Leadership Conference, and I had the opportunity to speak at the 2004 graduation ceremony. Now, sorry to dump all of that on you, but the point is I was not what most would expect someone with a mental illness to be. I'd always wanted to start my own business. So I founded EESI Lighting in February of 2009. And by December, we were well over $500,000 in revenue. In a few years, we grew to 30 employees and $5 million in revenue. And the savings match program we'd created was featured in a variety of local newspapers. It was a far cry from the cover of Fast Time or Entrepreneur, but we did really well for a small business. And by the time I exited the company, we had the environmental equivalent of planting 400,000 new trees each year for 10 years. Best of all, I also have a lifelong justification for driving an SUV. Now, one of the reasons we grew as quickly as we did was an extensive application that I developed that was years ahead of the competition. I was a self-taught developer, but I wanted a formal education. So I entered a full stack development program where I graduated near the top of the class. I used those skills to join a health tech company during Techstars, an accelerator where less than 1% of applicants are admitted. And when the opportunity arose, I put my career as a developer on hold to found Segment, to show that people like you and me with a bipolar disorder can accomplish all of this. Now, I know it's traditionally best practice to cover the gaps in your resume, but in this case, the gaps in my resume represent some of the most valuable experience on the subject. I was first diagnosed with a brain disorder following a suicide attempt in college. I was fortunate enough to have access to the best care possible, enough to get me back on my feet long enough to graduate. I had access to 3 psychologist appointments a week, 2 psychiatrist appointments a week, any medications, and access to premier facilities. And all of that wound up giving me something equivalent to a doctorate in my own brain. Unfortunately, things took a dive for me following graduation, and I spent the majority of my time in a pretty bad spot. And we were playing spin the bottle with psychiatric medications, something that might sound familiar to many of you listening in. The treatment, ironically, that allowed me to get back on my feet was electroconvulsive therapy and the guidance of a truly amazing psychologist. Now, I honestly thought ECT was some cruel form of punishment that had been banned a long time ago. But as it turns out, I was wrong. Studies show that a normal course of 6 to 9 sessions can be extremely effective. For example, 87% from the European Psychiatric Association, 86% from the National Institute for Mental Health, and 72% from the University of Pisa, which proved 2 things. First, the treatment works, and secondly, Italians are less conductive than the rest of us. I also learned the value of a sense of humor during recovery. For example, ECT can be a pretty daunting experience, but it also set me up for the best Halloween costume ever. So let's dig in. As a reminder, I'm going to teach you the things I've learned to help train and strengthen my foundation, to open up to others in a positive way, and to make adjustments to better harness my disorder. And all of that so that I can thrive in my work and life, so that I can enjoy my journey, and so that I have the opportunity to explore the full extent of my abilities. There's some things I would highly recommend that we won't be covering today, like nutrition, exercise, and different types of therapies. And if you do need more acute support or care, I highly recommend these resources as well. One of the most important aspects of my recovery was the realization that I could train and strengthen my foundation. So let's pretend for a second that we're all riding on elephants, and that we always have been. We've done everything together. We learned early on to do basic things like taking a step, and we practiced enough times that now my elephant knows how to guide my feet, knows how to run, and knows how to adjust my balance on its own. And all I need to do these days is decide where I want to go, and my elephant takes care of the rest. But following my first attempt, I learned very abruptly that even when things are going really well in my life, when I'm productive with close family, great friends, my elephant can still become sick. And regardless of how great my life is, if my elephant is too sick to walk and play and work, I can't enjoy and live my life to the fullest. It took my elephant getting too sick to function and nearly dying for me to come to the very important distinction that I am not my elephant. Our elephants handle a surprising amount of day-to-day functions on autopilot. And at any given moment, we're only in control of a very tiny part of that. But you can use that control to yank on the reins until you drag your elephant to the ground and you with it like I had done. Or you can take the time to get off your elephant, get it treatment, and teach it how to know what you want it to do. I am not my elephant, but once I understood that, I learned there are ways I could train and lead my elephant to overcome its challenges and use it to accomplish the things I want it to. So we train our elephants every day. In fact, we've spent our whole life training them. And there's a way of utilizing those strong forces of habits and momentums that can lead you to a more grounded, satisfying life. You can change the way you frame problems and tasks you need to get done so your elephant has an easier time getting them done. So let's talk about 3 tools to help train your elephant: microlisting, transitions, and momentum. So ironically, I had a pretty rough weekend when I was creating this webinar. I got a bad cold and my mood dropped with particularly bad timing because I needed to complete the first draft by Monday. Now, normally that wouldn't have been too bad, but I also got a 1-2 punch on Friday when one of my contract customers' app broke, meaning I'd need to go through a few thousand lines of code to find the bug that weekend. And I also got a call from my psychiatrist telling me the prescriptions she mailed out wouldn't arrive until Monday, meaning I'd be doing all of this without my elephant's daily attention deficit meds. So including my normal to-dos, I needed to get a lot done. And I had to do it while my elephant had a combination of Dory's attention span, Eeyore's sunny disposition, and bedtime bear's energy levels. And I thought, well, this should be interesting. Now I'm going to show you how I turn that overwhelming list into a productive weekend and a great Monday using microlisting, transitions, and momentum. But I can talk at you about these things all I want. It's not going to help you apply it. So go ahead and open your text editor, grab a notebook, or whatever your preferred method, and I want you to come up with 3 to 5 tasks that seem overwhelming to you or have in your past. Well done. So I used to look at a list like this when I was down and think, impossible, 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 impossible. And then spend the rest of the weekend binge watching Netflix, trying to endure this rising anxiety about showing up empty-handed and exhausted on Monday. These days, instead of the overwhelming list, I create a micro list by reducing each task to its simplest possible step. For example, instead of creating the webinar, I would create a title slide for the webinar. Instead of cleaning my whole house, I would do a dish. I would start with the clothes basket. I would start by logging into turbotax.com, by opening app.js. Whatever the immediate, most simple first step you can take to start that task is what we're looking for on the micro list. So I want to take another 90 seconds or so for you to change your overwhelming macro tasks into a micro list. And please feel free to message in the before or after so we can see some more examples. Awesome. So now that we've got our micro lists, I want to take a look at transitions, and more specifically, bad transitions. As I mentioned, I often distract myself with a show when I become overwhelmed. When it stops distracting me, I inevitably feel even more overwhelmed. So I watch the next episode. And this can continue to spiral until I'm clicking the play button as soon as possible to avoid another 15 seconds without distraction from the discomfort and underlying anxiety. I've found transitions can be incredibly important in my ability to get things done and feel good on Monday. The first and most difficult transition is always from distracting activity to our micro task. Completing the micro tasks don't always seem like much of an accomplishment, but the goal is to make the first transition as simple as possible to strengthen resilience. You'll see why that's really important in a moment. Next, I take advantage of the fact that my elephant learns from repetition. For example, you've washed dishes enough times that once you get started with a dish, our elephant can handle the rest without a lot of extra thought on our part. In this example, once I had the documents open, my elephant had no problem creating subtitles and headers. So use your micro task to transition into another part of the larger task your elephant knows how to do without much oversight. For the last transition, choose a task, still small, that seems really interesting or exciting. And if your elephant can't do interesting or exciting, try to find the least bad task. And the goal is to think of something that will give you the most bang for your buck in terms of accomplishments and difficulty. In this case, I created 2 of the slides I had the clearest vision for. So come Monday morning, I had those 2 slides done and all my titles, but I still wasn't there. I didn't get the deck done. Well, it's true. I used my macro list and transitions, and I didn't get all the way through. But at least it's easy to see things that way. Because what I've actually done is overcome the hardest challenges, build some momentum, and stay engaged until my elephant starts to feel a little bit. Now, one thing that's really important is stopping with momentum and direction. I was feeling a lot better on Sunday night, and I might have been able to finish the deck, but pushing for too much momentum can leave you just as exhausted and stalled as avoiding things altogether. So I made a quick note of where I should pick back up and chose to distract myself for the rest of the night. And what's really amazing about this is that when we do it, we're not only building momentum at checking things off a list, we're also changing the synaptic connections in our brains, making it easier to succeed at these things in the future. So let's take a look at transitions with another example. If somebody can message in a particular overwhelming task that you'd like to use, we can run through that as an example. Perfect. Here's a great one. So I have to follow up with a large amount of sales leads in a very short amount of time, and I don't feel well. I get this one a lot. I would start off with a micro task of creating and saving a draft with something as simple as, "Hi, so-and-so, it was a pleasure to speak with you," and then skip the rest and add something at the end like, "I'm here if you have any questions." And go through the same for each of those follow-ups that you need to write, saving those drafts. And finally, choose 1 or 2 of the easiest leads and add in the body and hit send. You've got great momentum at the end of this, and it's a great place to continue the rest of your follow-ups the next day when you come back in and have them all waiting for you in the drafts folder. As I mentioned, I didn't get the first draft completed over the weekend, but with the momentum that I built up and the way to get back into it, I had enough to finish the draft early Monday morning. So it seems simple, but before I had these tools, I spent a lot of time feeling anxious and guilty about not getting things done. In fact, I began to rely on the anxiety and guilt to force myself into action. Using this method, I'm able to do more, and it's sustainable, and I feel better throughout. So the next topic, opening up, is something we focus on a lot at Segment. Deciding when and how to tell other individuals is a very important decision, and I'm not going to lie. The promotion for this webinar was really intimidating to me. I mean, we sent an email to a list of some of the best and brightest in Colorado with the title, "Crazy Webinar Curated by a Guy with Bipolar," and a big goofy picture of me. I was afraid that people were going to think I was some kind of idiot. And when I got an email saying, "Not to sound bipolar, but you're an idiot, take me off the list," I felt a really bad sinking feeling. And if that was the only feedback I'd got, it probably would have been a lot worse. But that email was sandwiched between dozens more from people encouraging me to continue to do this work and how important it is. I can't tell you whether or not you should talk to others, but I will say living completely openly has transformed my life. I can accomplish more. I very rarely feel guilt or shame, and life is a lot easier for me. I did not know how heavy the burden of living in hiding was until I experienced what it's like to not. As I mentioned before, I can't tell you if you should, but if and when you decide to tell someone new about your disorder, especially at work, make sure you open up. You don't disclose. Disclosing is one point in time between two people, and it leaves a lot of room for misunderstanding and bad outcomes because it lacks any form of context or duration. Being open means talking about it in everyday conversation with an ally. What makes this great is that every time you decide to be open with someone, you're helping to make sure that the conversation spreads. Your actions in opening up now will make future conversations even easier. Now, most people know very little about bipolar disorder, and it's often the case that their understanding of it comes from sources that portray it as violent and rare or hopeless. I'll show you the formula that I've used to open up to hundreds of people in all types of situations. And over the next few slides, you'll create your own. To start, we need to address some common misconceptions. First, let's take over the idea that bipolar is hopeless. I always use this statistic because it immediately shows the hope that's inherent to the disorder, that treatments for bipolar are more than 80% effective. Next, we'll need to dispel the myths about the connection between bipolar and violence. So go ahead and choose one of these two, whether it's that we commit only 3 to 5% of violent acts, or that we're 10 times more likely than our peers to be victims of violence. And then the last misconception to address is the idea that bipolar is rare or freakish disorder. And both of these are great statistics to use here as well. So pulling it together, we get something like this. It's not as rare and scary as some people make it out to be. In fact, about 5.7 million people live with it. Treatments are more than 80% effective, and most people are especially surprised to hear we're 10 times more likely to be the victim of a crime than our peers. So now that we've set the stage, let's take a look at setting the context. Bipolar can look a lot different depending upon the individual, and so I like to give people an idea of what it looks like for me. So go ahead and choose one or two feelings or traits that you experience when you're up. Now here's a list of common ones to help, but please feel free to use something else if it fits you better. Great, now let's do the same thing for times when you're down. Awesome. So altogether for me, you can tell when I'm up because I talk really fast and I tend to be more irritable. When I'm down, I have really low energy and I feel like I'm never going to succeed at anything. So we have the stage set, we have some context. The next step is to set the agenda. To avoid disclosing, I like to set the agenda or simple next steps that can create new outcomes from the conversation. So spend some time thinking through which part of your story you want to share and what things you want people to know so that they can support you. And that's an important one. A lot of people want to help, but not very many people know how. Your agenda will and should vary based upon who you're telling and the particular situation. But it might include things like inviting curiosity. You can model curiosity by saying, I'm curious, have you had an experience with this in the past? It's completely okay to offer support, and it's also okay to ask for it. So the last part of our script is one of the most important because it reassures the listener that we are proactive with our disorder. We own it. Choose one or two of the things that you do in your own journey above to help. Do you take medications, exercise? Are you in therapy? Do you practice mindfulness? Think of a couple things that you do that help you to take control of your disorder. Okay, so our script so far sounds something like this. It's really not as rare as some people make it out to be. In fact, about 5.7 million people live with it. Treatments are more than 80% effective. And most people are especially surprised to hear we're 10 times more likely to be the victim of a crime. For me, you can tell when I'm up because I talk really fast and I tend to be more irritable. When I'm down, I have a really low energy and I feel like I'm never going to succeed at anything. But I overcome this with exercise and medications. So please feel free to ask any questions. You won't offend me by saying the wrong thing. And that's all well and good, but there's one thing that's missing. How do we start the conversation? Stand on our desk and shout, "Hey, I'm bipolar, but don't worry, it's not as rare and scary as people make it out to be." Fortunately, we don't actually have to start the conversation. The conversation around brain disorders may be very quiet and rare in the workplace, but it does exist. And that's really important because it means we don't need to start it from scratch. All we need to do is to continue it. We need to change from you don't say, "I have a bipolar disorder," to you don't say, "I have a bipolar disorder." And there's a surprising amount of opportunities to do that. Any conversation about Homeland or Robin Williams or Star Wars royalty, you can take overt cues from a coworker, like them talking about their own disorder, if that a loved one. And they can be a little bit more intimidating, but a conversation about negative news coverage is also a great opportunity. So I recommend starting by practicing in friendly environments, at home with family or friends. And I even have practiced this on telemarketers in the past. And I was really blown away when they started to tell me their own story about bipolar or other disorders. As I mentioned, I've used this framework to open up to hundreds of people, and I've had surprisingly few poor reactions. As we continue to open up individually, we create a more open community for ourselves and others. Now again, I'm not saying you should open up unless it's right for you. That's totally up to you or your situation. But this framework will give you a start when you're ready to do that. All right, we've learned how to train our elephant. We've got a way to open up to others. Now it's time to learn how to harness the ups and downs. First and foremost, it's important to know that you do not have to be disabled by your elephant. Your elephant is uniquely valuable, and you're in pretty good company when it comes to a bipolar disorder. The contributions people with a disorder have made to our world are astounding. People like Robin Williams, Carrie Fisher, Vincent van Gogh, Ernest Hemingway, the Beach Boys, and I don't know if any of the Minions are actually bipolar, but I thought it was a good place to throw in a mic drop. So it's very, very natural for those of us with a bipolar disorder to try and appear more normal. And one of the most common ways of doing this is to hide our non-normal moods. We tend to cover our downs or use our ups to compensate. And this is a big mistake. First of all, there are a lot of people out there with normal mental states. And if we're trying to compete at who can be most normal, we're at a distinct disadvantage. Instead, we can work as a team with support from neurotypical individuals to set ourselves up to harness the creativity and innovation of ups and make it so that even the downs can be productive and useful. We can communicate how our elephants are doing and what task would be best for them at the moment. Speaking of team support, I'd like to introduce my co-founder, Alexandra Miner, who can speak a little bit more about these strategies from a perspective other than the crazy guy talking so far.
Hi, everyone. This is Alexandra. So I want to tell you a little bit about my experience as the neurotypical one in our organization. Before Lance and I knew how to communicate, and frankly, all of the other people who are neurodivergent on our team, it was sometimes difficult working on projects together. For example, I recall reviewing a presentation that Lance had been preparing heads down for the past 24 hours. And when we finally met after that period to review it, I saw that there were so many different things going on. It wasn't strung together in an understandable or logical flow. And I was pretty frustrated and nervous because we had less than 12 hours until the client presentation, and this was what Lance was giving me. It turns out that Lance knew that this wasn't anywhere near the complete project, but had prepared a more subtle but also complete version. This other presentation, this more out there one, was his way of showing me more interesting and new ideas, but I was completely unaware that he wasn't going to make this work as it was, and that he didn't already know himself that this was not the right project for the client. So now we start by establishing what type of discussion we're going to have. In this case, it would have been beneficial to know that he wasn't handing me these out there ideas without having the primary project ready to go. Now we start the project review by making sure we have acceptance criteria, and those are met and communicated to the rest of the team so we can relax and really listen to the more out-of-the-box ideas. These out-of-the-box ideas are sometimes garbage, sometimes they're amazing. But combined, they lead to ideas that someone like me would have never thought of. And more often than not, they're the reason for the client or the customer saying that this isn't just a good project, but it's a great project. And I think that that same awareness is crucial for the downs. Lance can say to the team, I'm Eeyoring, as we affectionately call it, or I'm pretty down. And I know it's not because he's not excited on the whole. He just can't feel excited at that moment. This morning is actually a pretty great example for the two of us. We came in, a little bit early because we had a few extra things to work on and some early morning meetings, and I had a bunch of energy and was really excited to jump into the to-dos before anyone else arrived at the office. And when Lance got in, he told me that he was really low energy, which, if he wouldn't have announced that to me, I probably would have just kind of continued going and jumping into things like the webinar and the brain crawl. So instead, we just focused on one discrete task. And in a few hours, we were back up and running through the to-dos. And downtimes like these aren't always bad. They can be great for things like playing devil's advocate or identifying risks or potential problems. So am I telling you to say to your boss, I'm manic or I'm Eeyoring? No, not at all. Those are just terms that we use to talk about them. But I've seen people use things as simple as a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or even just letting people know where you are. We know that some workplaces need to be primed even before a simple motion like a thumbs up or a thumbs down might work, but we're happy to talk about that later on in the webinar. But overall, just that simple communication can save so much time and energy for both the neurotypical and the neurodivergent. Cool. I will let Lance take it back over now.
Thanks, Al. The self-awareness Alexandra is talking about is mostly about communicating the effects of my elephant on the current situation. Things like, normally I would be so excited about this, but right now my elephant can't do that. With the understanding that this is likely to change, can make all the difference in the world. A final note on harnessing your moods. It's also really important to pay attention to your defensiveness. Oftentimes, a gut reaction to defend an idea or a position is a good cue there's a problem with the logic or flow. So far, we've learned that we can use micro-listing and transitions to maintain momentum and make physical changes to our brains. We learned the importance of opening up instead of disclosing. And we learned tools like manic checks and Eeyoring to harness the power of both ups and downs. Together, we and our elephants can do some really amazing things. But I should probably tell you about one more gap in my resume. Remember that exit that I told you about? Well, once my business was taking hold with a life of its own, and after I learned I could handle the ups and downs and still maintain the image of a sturdy, strong CEO, it felt like my journey with the disorder was finally over, and I'd won. Life was back on track. Bipolar was more of a detour than a chronic disorder to me, and I could more or less put it in the past. And that probably would have been a really nice life, but it's not mine. It turned out that my journey with the disorder wasn't finished after all. My best friend and one of the women I loved most in this world both relapsed. I learned what it was like to be on the other side, trying to help someone with a severe disorder. And I lost it all in less than 6 months. My company, my relationship, my home, the entire life I had made for myself and the future that came with it was destroyed by the effects of a disorder. And even with all my experience and all my knowledge, without the resources, support, and acceptance, I was helpless to help them getting to feel better. For better or for worse, I learned what it's like to be on the outside watching someone you love battle the disorder. I gained a broader understanding of the effects outside of my own disorder, and I got some more practice in recovering from them. But something else pretty amazing came as a result of this for me. I went to see a new psychiatrist, and when I told her my diagnosis, she said, "Bipolar? No problem. I can fix bipolar all day." Now, I was a little dumbstruck, but she started explaining how we'd start with a foundation of lamictal to lift the lows, lithium to rein in the manium, and one or two more for the final adjustments. I wasn't fully sold, but she definitely seemed to be, so I decided to give it a shot. I was back to health within a month, and within 3 months, I felt better than I had in years. And it created a fundamental shift in the way I view bipolar disorders. I stopped seeing this as a terrible disease not to be spoken of with drugs and treatments that are also not to be spoken about. And I realized that someday a bipolar disorder is going to be seen as manageable as any chronic disorder like diabetes or asthma. Which meant that a major contributing factor to the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 24 is a manageable chronic disorder like diabetes or asthma. With my new understanding, I knew I had to make a change. In 3 years, I've come a long way. I was originally a crazy dude with grandiose ideas, sending hashtag selfies to my family. And now I'm a crazy dude with grandiose ideas, with a brilliant co-founder, the support of major business and community leaders, and a cute logo that everybody really likes. But it's going to take a lot more than that. And it's going to take more than individual effort. Remember how I said that bipolar is correlated with increased creativity, increased intelligence, increased aptitude for leadership? Well, we have everything we need to solve this. So we're calling you to help us create something called Open Labs, so that we can take creative, dynamic minds like the ones listening right now and change the current state of brain disorders together. The lab has 4 primary components. 1 part mentorship. The lab will match members with mentors and experts who are living successfully. 1 part sponsor, where we will create a peer support network to share what works and be there for each other when things don't work. 1 part advocacy, where we'll advocate to destigmatize brain disorders and create true parity. And 1 part innovation lab, where we'll function as a cross-company innovation lab to constantly explore new ways of working towards one goal: a world where we can live openly with hope. And how do we get started on that world where we can live openly with hope? It starts this September. We're hosting the Open Summit, a 2-day unconference model where you'll leave with a network of peers, experts, and resources to affect change with your disorder and feel supported while doing it, because you'll now be a part of an ongoing think tank and support network for people who've been impacted by brain disorders. At the summit, we'll do everything from trading personal practices among the group to design thinking workshops on change management guides with the help of experts who have effectively implemented them. All of this will create the founding cohort and direction for Open Labs. Our facilitators will capture those reactions and the information from these discussions to create the programming for Open Labs. And this means that Open Labs content and information will be built for the people who will be using them. So we're asking you to join the summit and lay the foundation for Open Labs. The 2-day summit starts at $450, but we've lined up some amazing sponsors. So if the price is a problem, we'll help to cover it. We won't let price be an inhibitor to anyone being able to attend this event. And because you're on this webinar, if you register by Saturday at midnight, you'll receive 5 weeks of personal coaching, and this is really cool, because we have a wide variety of experts to match whatever specific coaching needs you want. Whether it's with your workplace interactions or telling your story, you name it, we've got the experts. And with that, we're all done with Act 1. So please join us for Acts 2 and 3. There's the Boulder Britain crawl going on as part of Boulder Startup Week next Thursday, next Wednesday, on May 17th. And then we'll be coming back to another webinar that should be absolutely fantastic with Story 2 on how to craft your own story. And that'll go into some of the things we talked about today a little bit more in depth. So please don't forget to register for the summit by Saturday. And I want to say that there are a lot of confusing parts about this disorder, but the one thing that is very clear is that all successful changes come with a strong community. So please, again, join us in being a part of that community at the Open Summit. And now, if anybody has any questions, we'll get going with those.
Okay, this is Alexandra again. I'm going to take this question. So the question is, can I be anonymous at the summit? So once you're at the summit, we'll need you to be open, but we don't have to tell anyone outside of the group that's attending. If you are personally impacted or if you have a loved one, there's a number of people who are involved with us for all different reasons. Really, it's up to you to be open when you're ready, and we're happy to answer any additional questions about that. But like I said, you are welcome to not disclose your specific reason for being
there. This is a good one. Do you really do all the things that you recommend, like nutrition and exercise? I do try to, but I'm most certainly not perfect. What I have found is things like micro lists work really well for exercise and nutrition as well. Sometimes just putting on my running shoes is enough to get that habit part of my brain going, and before I know it, I'm out the door and getting some exercise.
Okay, this question is, who will be at the summit and what role do I take if I'm a family member and don't have the disorder myself? So as far as attendees go, as Lance mentioned, we'll have people who are living successfully with bipolar, at least for the most part. Everyone has their different spouts and bouts, but just by the nature of where we are in the tech ecosystem, most of the people that we're working with are in pretty highly skilled jobs or functioning within those roles. But we'll also have other attendees who will be experts who are leading the various discussions and the facilitators of the workshops. And then as far as the other roles for family members, so loved ones, friends, family, they're all welcome to join at the summit. We'll have options for people to dedicate, and people have done this for an older sibling or someone who wasn't able to overcome the disorder, or just another family member. And there's also the option, if you're representing a company, to be a sponsor, so you can demonstrate your support to employees or anyone else in your organization. And of course, it's always beneficial, I'm speaking as a neurotypical, to have people like us who are understanding and can help advocate for this issue. So please reach out to us to be a part of the summit or to be a part of the labs.
Let's see. Okay, so what do you mean by hope when you say living openly with hope? Isn't that sort of a fluffy word? And that's most definitely can be a fluffy word. I think there's two different definitions for hope. One is hope as a noun and the other is hope as a verb. So for me to say, I hope things go well with this, I hope I get Broncos season tickets this year, that is a very fluffy word that's almost closer to wishful thinking and denial than what we're looking for. The kind of hope that we're talking about is a noun, and it's the feeling that comes with a plan to add value to your life that has the support that you're going to need to overcome the seen obstacles and the resources and support that you'll need to overcome things that are unseen.
Okay, so another question, how many people are you hoping to bring to this summit and how many people will I innovate with? So we're capping the summit as of right now at 40 people. And really that's just because of the workshopping format of it. So we want to make sure that everyone's able to fully engage and participate. And like I said before, that group, just because of the nature of where we are in the tech ecosystem, is going to be people who have done a lot of this workshopping, but then also others who maybe are a little bit less experienced in it. And so, everyone is welcome in all different ways. All right. Okay, hold on, we have a couple coming in here, selecting.
Okay, we've got a good one. Are there any apps or pieces of technology, et cetera, that may make it easy to be more productive? And what I've found is that apps and technology can be extremely useful, but the underlying thing is that they need to make sense for you. So sometimes individuals may love to journal and really go into detail about their mood states and their mood logs. Whereas for an individual like myself, it's more useful to have something that I can do a quick touch up on so that I can have an idea of where my mood went without going into as much detail. So I don't have anything offhand that I would recommend right now, but we can certainly put together a list in the follow-up emails that we'll send out.
This is a good one. I guess we should have said this before our Q&A. Will we have access to this presentation after we're through? Yeah, so we'll be sending a recording of this to everyone. So you'll have this along with all the links so you know where to access everything. So we're happy to send that to you in a follow-up email. Okay, another question. As an employer, how can I best respond to employees who live with bipolar and exhibit extreme behavior? So this is a really big question, and I think that there's a lot of different solutions, but really we don't like to give any specific advice since we don't know exactly what that employee is going through. And as we said before, generally the people that we're working with right now are living fairly successfully. And so, there's a number of groups that we would be happy to recommend for maybe that earlier stage. And of course, there's lots of educational resources, and we have a number of employee and employer handbooks as well that kind of walk you through how you can select those different resources. Would definitely be happy to answer that more in depth offline once we know a little bit more about the specific disorder and behaviors. Okay, any more questions? Okay, another question about the price point for the summit. So yeah, it's going to be a completely immersive experience, and so that's the reason for the price point. And thankfully, we have a lot of really great partners, and so as you go up in the different brackets and getting more one-on-one coaching and expert roundtables and things like that, that's at a really discounted price, but we know that that is still a lot for most of us. So as we said, we have some pretty amazing sponsors set up. So if you're able to request with us, if you can follow that link that's up on the screen right now, we're happy to put in that request to our sponsors. You can remain anonymous, again, with them knowing who the sponsorship dollars are going towards, but we do not want cost to be an inhibiting factor. So if you have friends or anyone who's interested in coming that you think that would be a blocker for them, please still have them sign up for sponsorship because that's what those dollars are there for.
And I wanted to round back real quick on the question of how you can best respond to employees who are exhibiting extreme behavior. The details on how to respond to that, as Al said, we have some resources, and that's dependent upon the situation. But one thing that I would keep in mind is that bipolar is a disorder. And so the individual that's there is not necessarily in a great place. They need to have medical treatment, or they may need therapy, or they may just need a third party to come in and help to establish some boundaries. But I would highly, highly recommend trying to show compassion and trying to understand that what they're going through at that moment is not who they are. It's just something that they're experiencing. They're sick.
Okay, so I have a question on the difference between what we're doing in a traditional support group or even some of the more modern ones that are available in Colorado. So there are some amazing different organizations that offer support, like NAMI Family. The Wellness Network has some amazing resources as well. But the difference that Lance went through with those 4 different components is that we're really focused on how can we take those parts of individuals who are living successfully and all of the wonderful gifts that also come with having these different disorders and utilize them in a really positive way. And so we're there for the times when things don't go as well, but we're also there to push the envelope and try and come up with innovative different solutions and act as a sort of think tank, innovation lab, cross-company affinity group where, when people have questions in the community about how they can better serve, that we're going out and giving them solutions that are really built by the people who will be using them in the end. Okay. All right. I think we're going to wrap up here. So if you have any more questions, please feel free to enter them in this last couple minutes while I'm talking. And then if not, you can expect an email from us with all this follow-up information. And again, thank you for participating. And as Lance said, we cannot do this with just the 2 of us or just our team. So we really appreciate your support and hope that we can continue these great conversations and questions and really affect change. And hope to see you at the brain crawl. And we did actually just get a larger venue for the last stop, which will have the Jerry Colonna Brad Feld talk along with Impact Founder. So please do sign up, even though it says it's full. And then the Craft Your Story webinar is going to be with one of our partners, who's another Techstars company out of New York. And they've been specializing in telling the stories of people with different brain disorders. And so really unique position for them to be able to coach on that. All right, well, thanks so much and have a good rest of your night.
Thanks, guys.